The Darksiders franchise of games has had a rocky history, not because the games were bad or lacked quality, but because the publisher they were tied to went bankrupt, putting the future of the series into jeopardy. THQ made a string of bad decisions, and some bad luck, eventually forcing them to close their doors. Their wealth of IP, or intellectual properties, were all up in the air if they were going to be bought up by other companies, or even had a future to begin with. Darksiders was also caught up in this. Before THQ went under, the last Darksiders game they had published was Darksiders 2, which released August 14th, 2012. While fans of the series had huge love for the first game, what with its otherworldly gothic designs, and its inspirations from The Legend of Zelda to even Devil May Cry, Darksiders 2, while following up with all the same designs and inspirations, had made a few additions to the game design that some fans critiqued. Now, as for me, Darksiders 2 is my favorite out of the first two games. It felt bigger and more ambitious, while still having the same core as the first game. But all of that was made and released by 2012. The franchise was eventually bought by a company called Nordic Games. For the first time in years, fans had hope that the series may have had a future after all. I, too, was ecstatic with this announcement. Up to that point, I was thinking it was a real shame to have a series I loved be cut so short into its story. The series has us playing as the four horsemen of the apocalypse, all on different missions for these three enigmatic statues called the Council. 7 seals were broken, thus leading to the apocalypse on Earth, and a war between heaven and hell then takes place with Earth as the battleground. Humanity has fallen, and in Darksiders 1, you play as war. Darksiders 2, you play as death. Both characters have their own personalities, motivations, and ways of fighting. Both are on different missions, set at different times in the overall timeline. In fact, as of this moment, Darksiders 1 is still the game that takes place the furthest in the overall timeline. But the fact you play as a single horseman in each of the first two games gave everyone the impression that there would be 4 games, each dedicated to one of the 4 horsemen, and then a 5th game allowing us to play as all 4 and finish the series. But because of the aforementioned bankruptcy troubles of THQ, that was all thrown up in the air. But finally, on November 27th, 2018, Darksiders 3 finally launched, and with it, another of the 4 horsemen was playable for the first time ever, Fury herself. So, when Darksiders 3 first launched, reception on the game was mixed, to say the least. Review outlets were all over the place. Some loved the game and the changes it brought to the table, even going so far as to say it was their favorite in the series. Others said it was another entry in the series, putting it as roughly equal to the prior games. And naturally, some said that the game was the worst in the whole franchise. Like I said, all over the place. So with that said, let's dive in and see what makes Darksiders 3 tick. So while Darksiders 2 followed up the first game with the same overall experience, just in a more open setting, and with RPG elements attached, Darksiders 3 goes in a very different route. The third entry takes a step back, leans in more to a similar level design as Darksiders 1, while also dipping their toes a bit into the Souls-like combat design. We'll get to that in a bit. So the world and level design of Darksiders 3 definitely takes inspiration from the first game. There's no open world design in this one. It's more hallways and maybe some slightly bigger areas. You're given the occasional spots where you can see sections that you can't reach just yet. But it's also built in a way that you're going to need to come back to these locations after acquiring more ways of traversal. You might see a web blocking a pathway that one of your future abilities will make easy work of. Or maybe you'll see some weird purple rocks blocking another pathway, yet another thing that a different ability can work around. You'll see stuff like this pop up constantly throughout the game. A lot of the times, these extra pathways lead to small little spots that house an item for you. After getting the item, there's nowhere else to go, so you head back to the path you were just on. Other times, they lead you to a lot more of a roundabout way to get through a level. They often lead to more items that you can use as either temporary consumables or to help with permanent upgrades to Fury's power. And naturally, they also lead to lots and lots of enemies. The level design has a lot of thought put into it. The devs certainly got creative with what they could work on, but I could definitely see the Dark Souls 1 world inspiration in this design. Having pathways that lead you to areas you didn't think they would, finding shortcuts with just a little bit of exploring, and even showing me a boss that I wasn't going to reach for a little bit yet. Darksiders 3 wears its inspirations on its sleeve, and doesn't try to hide it either. The game has its own take on some of these formulas, both to great effect, as well as to its detriment. When a game takes a lot of inspiration from other games, it's naturally going to open itself up to comparison with those very games that it took from. This is one of the reasons for the game's overall mixed reception. I've played through both Dark Souls and now Darksiders 3. And while the devs did a great job in the level design here, it doesn't really hold a candle to Dark Souls with just how well that game connects all the various areas in ingenious ways. That said, Darksiders 3 still isn't a slouch in that regard. While it doesn't hold up to the extremely high bar that Dark Souls set, it doesn't really need to hit quite that far to still be considered good level design. For every bit of backtracking that you have to do here, the developers still reward us going out of our way and exploring when we get new abilities to traverse the world. It's not required either. You just end up missing items that can otherwise make you stronger in the rest of the game. Again, not required, since you can still beat the game without these items. But even with that, Darksiders 3 still puts the Darksiders spin on that level design. So rather than just having various zones connect to each other in unexpected ways, Darksiders 3 still puts puzzles and platforming into the mix as well. This is still in a similar vein to that of the Legend of Zelda games. When you're trying to figure out a way forward, sometimes you can easily figure out a puzzle in front of you. But other times, it's not so straightforward. One such puzzle that took me a long time to figure out was me trying to figure out how to cross a ravine sitting in between two buildings. I searched both buildings inside and out, and could not figure out a way across. If you jump into the ravine, the other wall is too high for you to climb out of. An earlier mechanic they taught us in this area was to use these tall, limbering tentacle monsters. They're not aggressive, and you can move them by hitting them. Then, when you get up to them, you can hit the button the game prompts, and it'll take you to the top of its head. Think of this like a portable platform. It just takes a little effort to get it to where you need it to go. It took me no less than an hour to find out that the monster in one of the buildings had holes in the wall just big enough to let it outside and get into the ravine. It took me entirely too long to realize this, but sometimes it's a simple puzzle that can stump you. Like seriously, I was looking for something else the entire time. But it was still fun to figure it out eventually. And after you finish some puzzles in the game, you get to hear that iconic Darksiders jingle again. Oh yeah. In each of the Darksiders games, there always seems to be one or two puzzles that really stump me for some reason. And they're typically puzzles that are very easy when you think about it the correct way. This was that easy puzzle for me that truly stumped me in Darksiders 3. But outside of combat, the puzzles add in quite a bit of both relief between battles, as well as their own level of challenge. It's really nice not having to always deal with just enemies. Adding in the puzzles really helps spice things up a bit, as well as to get the player thinking. Remember when people would tell us that TV and video games makes us stupid? I'd love to see what those people think after playing a puzzle game. The puzzles still offer just enough of something different to keep things interesting. Sometimes the puzzles can translate into the boss fights. This really helps to show the Legend of Zelda inspirations. Something that can feel like a puzzle, but isn't really, is also when you have to search for the next boss. Fury, hunting down the 7 deadly sins, has a compass at the top of the screen pointing out where the next one is. The compass is really accurate in telling you where to go on your hunt. It'll even point you directly into holes that Fury can squeeze into and get into a new area. Now, there's something really interesting about this. When I said it's sort of a puzzle in following that, it's more in the idea that you don't quite know how far the boss really is. You can fast travel around using Vulgrim's serpent holes, but with that, it could end up really throwing you further away from your destination. I think the best way to prevent this from happening would be to just keep heading straight for it, going from boss to boss. Doing so should streamline things a bit. That said, while it would make for a bit less backtracking, it also means less exploring and getting items that you couldn't acquire previously. So in the end, the decision comes down to you. Each time you teleport by using the serpent holes, the next time you go back to the same serpent hole, it'll mark the location you last teleported from. This did help me figure out where I was after I would go back to upgrade my gear. So out of everything here, traversal feels good in Darksiders 3. The added abilities that you get that help you traverse the world is limited to 4 abilities. While I don't remember right offhand, I feel like it's less than we had in the previous games. Heck, Darksiders 3 doesn't allow Fury to climb on walls and ceilings like the prior games allowed. So while we did get a good amount of similar level design, there are still some things that Darksiders 3 is missing from earlier titles. But from what we have in the game, it's still great, all things considered. When I see something, I can easily tell what I'm looking at and what ability I need to use. Everything is color-coded accordingly. I don't know how that works with colorblind people though. That said, webs need the orange flame hollow to burn through. Wind tornadoes utilize the yellow storm hollow to raise Fury to higher heights. Purple objects can be moved or destroyed with the purple force hollow, and water can be walked on and grabbed with the blue stasis hollow. Even without the use of the colors, there are different designs to everything, making it easy to tell what hollow ability we need to use. There are also different symbols for each of the hollow forms for Fury that show up just under her health bar in the upper left corner. That, and there are subtle hints as to which form she's in, such as little bits of lightning or fire on her person. And an even better tell would be the weapons she has access to, changing depending on which hollow power she's using. But since we're on the topic of powers and weapons, we might as well talk about the combat now, one of the biggest parts of the Darksiders franchise, and one of the most controversial changes that Darksiders 3 took up. The previous Darksiders games were both built with a more hack and slash style of combat. A bunch of enemies show up, and you start mowing them down with your sick moveset. You've got some basic combos that you can perform, movement, and some abilities that you can use. Darksiders 2 really gave the player a lot more abilities, and I love it for that. Darksiders 3, however, while still showing bits of its hack and slash DNA, it also has some elements from the Dark Souls games that it uses. Elements such as dodging attacks, enemies that hit hard, and dying means you have to trek back to where you were to claim your souls again. Admittedly, that one's a bit more on the nose. Considering Darksiders 3 first released in 2018, puts it in the earlier batch of games inspired by Dark Souls. The part that has people riled up is how they changed a good portion of the combat systems to follow the Souls-like trend, and I can definitely see why fans of the prior games wouldn't resonate with this change in combat. For one thing, this change makes Fury feel much weaker than she should, and this is when comparing her to that of her brothers that we already played. What I mean is, in combat, War and Death are both fast and hit really hard. They really give off the impression of being absolute unstoppable forces up against hordes of fodder. Basically, one of the concepts that make up a hack and slash gameplay style. Fury, on the other hand, can lose her HP really quickly, get overwhelmed when a few enemies group up, and the gameplay incentivizes her dodging enemy attacks. This system isn't inherently bad. I would argue it's still quite fun and works for what the devs were trying to do. It's just a very different system from the prior games. And when you add in how weak Fury feels in comparison to War and Death, it goes into the overall presentation of the character. It sort of sets a weird impression about her to the player, especially if the player in question has played the other Darksiders games. And this presentation even follows into that of some of the cutscenes. I'll get to that point in a little bit. So as for the combat, the game really encourages you to dodge enemy attacks, more so at the last second, just before being hit. Doing so will have the game slow down to show you that you successfully dodged correctly, and then if you attack, you get some bonus damage via her arcane damage. Every weapon that Fury gets has a dodge and attack animation. When you do so, you'll see the damage number be the same color as Fury's hair. If you aren't using a specific element, her hair is a very dark violet, so the damage numbers will pop up like that. That signifies that you hit the enemy with arcane damage. Critical hits are the same in this scenario. It's all treated like arcane damage. So basically, if you want guaranteed crits, dodge and then immediately attack. The combat system feels very fluid to use, and it even feels pretty generous with its timing on dodges. Normal hits will show up as plain white text, so you can really get an understanding of when you're hitting with arcane or normal damage. So when you start working your attack combos, while also incorporating in the dodges and attacking right afterward, it feels good. There were plenty of times I could take on a foe that initially gave me trouble, and if I could get through the fight without taking any hits, it felt amazing. Like I was really learning what the game was trying to teach me, and then I would promptly get hit by a lesser enemy right afterward. Dodging enemies is great and all, but what about when you have multiple enemies to worry about? So this is a bit of a weird one. Seeing an enemy in front of you setting up an attack is easy to read and follow, but when the enemy is off screen, you'll see this sort of arrow that points in their direction when they're winding up for an attack. For the life of me, I could never get the timing down on dodging those, not unless I turned my camera just in time anyway. It could be a skill issue, but it's really hard to read an attack when you can't see the enemy. But at least you can still use those arrows to tell you where the enemies are at least in proximity to you. As for those hack and slash elements I was talking about earlier, Fury still does have combos that she can use. I don't think it's as much as, say, War or Death, but she does have the ability to use those combos in the same way. Just mashing your attack button a lot will do her basic combo. Add in a delay between one of those whip swings, and it changes her combo to focus on one enemy instead. This also seems to deal more damage than her basic combo, so it's worth it. If you hold the attack button, she'll instead start swinging her whip around in a sort of area of effect style. This is great for hitting smaller enemies as they try to surround you. If you jump in the air, you also have a basic air combo there just by mashing the attack button. And when you add in her hollow elemental forms, she gets new weapons that you can mix up in conjunction with her basic whip combat. The Flame Hollow gives her the Chains of Scorn. These are like mini flails that she can throw around for a little bit of extra range in combat. The The Storm Hollow gives her the Lance of Scorn. It's a lance that gives her a little extra reach in melee combat, and if you do a perfect dodge and then use that to attack, she'll throw it at the enemy that she just dodged. It's great for taking out ranged enemies, and this follows with the Force Hollow getting a hammer, and the Stasis Hollow getting dual swords. Each weapon has a unique moveset from the rest of the weapons, and if you hold the attack button for those, you do a charge up and attack. There's a light that'll pop up, as well as an audio cue that you can listen for during this charge up. If you release the button at the right time, it gives a stronger attack instead. And while we're on the topic, you can also change which hollow form you're using on the fly. This includes both in and out of combat. And since there are enemies that can be weak to certain elements, it's highly encouraged to learn how to fight them using all the forms, even switching mid-combat. It does add quite a bit of extra variety to Fury's arsenal, and since this is a Darksiders game, Fury also has her own Wrath abilities to use in combat. She has a different Wrath ability depending on if she's in her base form or in any of her hollow forms. Each hollow form has a different one associated with them. Storm Hollow can spawn mini twisters that seek out nearby enemies to deal damage. Force Hollow pulls in nearby enemies and then exploding to send them flying. And Fury's base form is an area of effect attack using her whip. Figuring out which Wrath ability to use in the midst of battle is up to the player to figure out. That said, Fury even gets a sort of chakram that she can throw in battle and in puzzles. The variety is there. It just takes a bit of experimenting with to find out what works for you. Oh, something I nearly forgot to talk about. In the previous Darksiders games, both War and Death have a form that they can power up into to really lay down the heat on your enemies. War has his Chaos form, which has him take on the form of a fiery demon of sorts. Death has his Reaper form, which, well, yeah, he's basically the Grim Reaper. Fury is no different in this regard. She has her own transformation that she can use as well, called the Havoc form. Unlike Death's Reaper form, which has a more static design, Fury's Havoc form follows War's Chaos form in that it's more ethereal in nature, lots of movement in something that looks like fire. When Fury is in this form, she gains a second whip that she can use to attack with, and boy does she hit everything around her. Every hit is also arcane damage, so it does get that extra bit of power to every swing. That said, it might actually be less damage than some of her normal combat with the hollow forms. Fury's Havoc form feels more like a get-out-of-jail-free card in this game. If you're running low on health, or get tired of dodging all the time for a bit, just put on the Havoc form and swing away. When Fury is in this form, she slowly regains HP over time, and if she's hit in this form, rather than losing HP, she just loses some of the time she has in the form. It's got a lot of benefits to using it, but against certain bosses, she can quickly drop out of the form. But I'm super glad the tradition of the Horseman transformations is still intact here. The ways that you can make Fury stronger are in her level ups, as well as upgrading her weapons and armor. Now, Fury doesn't level up in the traditional RPG sense. There are no experience points that get added to some arbitrary number on a bar. Instead, the souls that you collect through combat are used as a currency at Vulgrim's shop. You can feed him souls, and that's where you get the arbitrary number on a bar that shows up. Fill up the bar, and you have a level up that you can spend on your overall health, normal damage, or arcane damage. While your HP will increase by a static numbered amount, leveling up your normal or arcane damage types will increase them by a percentage. Regardless, increasing them in general will make Fury stronger in one form or another. But, like I said before, you can also upgrade her weapons and armor. You can put an asterisk on the armor there. So upgrading her weapons is fairly simple. You get a certain material called adamantine. You get it in different levels of quality. Take it to Ulthane to make your weapons stronger. Oh, by the way, Ulthane is also in this game. Pretty easy to understand. Armor, however, is a bit different here. Fury can get several different armors that she can wear. Most of them will offer bonuses to her for different styles of fighting. There's an armor for each type of hollow form that'll strengthen those very specific powers for Fury. And when it comes to the base game, this was pretty much all I found available. There are more armors in the DLCs, the Crucible and Keepers of the Void. The Crucible is just like it was back in Darksiders 2. Fury goes into another dimension of sorts and takes on many, many waves of enemies. The higher she gets before cashing out, the better the reward. And it just so happens there are armors available as rewards. And sadly, I happen to miss out on playing most of the Crucible. It didn't hit me until I finished the main story that while you have 3 save slots, each can only save to the slot that's tied to it. Because of this, when I beat the main story, it immediately put me into New Game Plus. And with only 1 save slot tied to that particular save, I had no way of going back. So the most I could say here, without going back in and making this video take much longer to make, is that it's exactly what I said above. Wave-based, and you get rewards. There's a slight story tied to it, it seems, and I have no doubt that Wicked K is tied to the final floor. Sad that I missed that fight. That said, every horseman has their own set of abyssal armor. This is armor that was made specifically for each horseman to boost their power, and the lore states that a demon of some kind stole Fury's set. Enter Keepers of the Void. Finish this DLC and Fury's abyssal armor is now available to you. And since you get it from Vulgrim himself, I can only imagine what demon stole that armor. But as for the DLC itself, I really enjoyed it. It's kind of bland in terms of how everything basically looks the same, and the enemies are all the same ones, but it's the puzzles that stand out more in this to me. Some of them really stumped me, but when I figured each one of them out, it felt great. And the bosses themselves started out easy enough, but eventually turned into really tough challenges. The reason for the spike in difficulty is because you have 5 bosses total, 4 of them before the final boss. And this DLC is available to you once you acquire Fury's first hollow form, the Flame Hollow. When you enter the DLC, there are 4 paths in different directions, and each of them require you to unlock each of the 4 hollow forms. So, when you have the Flame Hollow, you can only go down the first pathway and complete it, and that's pretty early into the game. That means your level will be low, your gear will be under-leveled as well, and so on. So the first boss is meant to be taken on earlier than when I entered the DLC, but I honestly had no idea about that at the time. And each boss will give you a second weapon type for each of your hollow forms, adding an even more variety to combat. But let me tell you that the abyssal armor is straight up broken in a lot of instances. Straight up constant health and wrath regeneration, even while slow, it still saves your healing consumables straight up. Get this armor and the rest of the game will be that much easier. So all of this was just a roundabout way for me to talk about that asterisk that I put on upgrading armors. Basically, while you do have several sets of armor, you can't start upgrading any of them until New Game Plus. Beat the main quest, see the credits, and hop into the game again with the same gear you had before. You're just missing the hollows at that point. But it's here that we can start to pick up new items that we can upgrade armor with. Whatever bonuses it naturally gave to Fury before will all get stronger. Even the base armor, which had no bonuses, will get bonuses if you go to upgrade it. But the abyssal armor is still the best, hands down. And it looks badass. But finally, there is one more way to strengthen Fury. That's through the enhancements. Enhancements are essentially items that you can tie to any of your individual weapons in the game. Each enhancement has a couple of different buffs that it gives to Fury, like increasing health, normal damage, buffing a certain hollow element, you name it. But growing those enhancements is a little different. It's the same concept as upgrading your weapons and armor. Take a sufficient amount of the material needed to upgrade the enhancements to Ulthane, and then choose what to upgrade. But in this moment, we see that there are 2 pathways available. Each pathway will make one of the 2 buffs stronger, but not the other. It gives us the choice of which one we prefer to upgrade, but once you max out that enhancement, it maxes out both branches instantly. So that path you skipped out on will also get buffed by the end. And then you can switch the enhancement to another weapon if you so choose. This is most of the stuff involving the combat in the game. Quite a few changes from the first 2 games, but honestly, it's still well done. Anytime I was hit, I knew it was on me for that one. It felt fair in the context of being a pseudo Souls-like game. Now, if you really don't vibe with the new style of combat, the game does allow you to switch to a more classic approach. I don't believe I saw this option when the game first came out years ago, but Classic changes a few things from the new style. It's not like the combat itself just magically becomes hack and slash like its predecessors. It's still the overall same combat style. You hit enemies a lot, dodge attacks, try to get perfect dodges, use your hollow forms, etc. Everything here is essentially the same from what I played of it. However, I did notice that using consumables is instant now, rather than taking a second to use. And I'm not sure if damage numbers change with this or not. But overall, it was mostly the same. Just kind of an option if you don't like having Fury stop moving for a second just to use a heal in battle. Other than that, there are also a bunch of different difficulty settings to choose from here. I play the game on balanced, which I figure is sort of like normal. But even on this, the game was still quite difficult. I've died no less than 30 times, and there are even tougher difficulties out there. But I wanted to make sure it wasn't going to take me 60 hours to beat the game to make this video. Overall, I did enjoy the gameplay a lot. While it is slower paced than the previous games, it still felt well put together. I wasn't fighting with a controller at any point, and the game was quite responsive to play. There were a couple of times that I would fall while trying to prompt the swing animation on something, but that could have just been bad timing on my part. Alright, so something that is a main staple for games like these, and Darksiders is no stranger to this, is the boss battles. While Darksiders 3 isn't quite as big as the first two games, it does have its fair share of bosses to fight against, some easier than others, as expected. In the case of this game, Fury has to hunt down the 7 deadly sins. We're talking all of them: sloth, envy, pride, the works. And while those are the main story bosses in the game, there are also some hidden bosses spread throughout called the Chosen. When you come across these enemies, they're typically stronger versions of enemies that you'll come across throughout the game. The unique bosses are all the sins themselves, and one other spot too that lets you choose to fight between 2 different demons. Basically, if the boss is involved in the story in some way, they're unique from all the other enemies in the game. Some of the designs are really cool, and they do make it easy to tell which sin you're up against. Wrath is covered in armor while being loud, and he has red skin. Sloth is just a really huge, lazy bug. Easy stuff like that. One of my favorite designs is Envy. They look so cool in my opinion, and the weapons they hold are very reminiscent of the Four Horsemen's weapons. Each sin has their own style of fighting. A lot of them make sense for what they are, as well as taking advantage of their character design. Sloth starts out barely attacking you, and just sicking his minions on you. But once you get him to phase 2, he shows that he's no slouch in damaging Fury. His body is massive, so he'll try to slam the ground to hurt you. Wrath will go up to fight Fury in an arena with many other enemies. He'll punch the ground multiple times, causing shockwaves you have to jump over to avoid. And when he needs to heal up, he'll go and take down some of the enemies in the arena. Pride is a narcissist. Each of the Sin's styles of combat really shows off exactly who they are. But one of them in particular is much tougher than the rest. Enter Gluttony. This guy has no right being this stupidly difficult. Up to now, the game has taught us that we need to either dodge or jump over attacks to avoid them. Imagine now being shown that we need to run away from the enemy instead because you can't dodge the attack. Not only that, by the time I got to him, his health pool was stupidly large. Phase 1 took so long to get through, and I ended up dying quite a few times because his health just wouldn't go down. Not to mention how little I had a chance to attack him at times. But once I got him to phase 2, it was really easy to figure out what I was supposed to do. Speaking of that, some of the bosses have mechanics that are required to hurt them. This is something that's really pulled out of The Legend of Zelda, and it's something I'm glad they kept from the previous games. It's not every boss, mind you, but at least it's still there. I like the boss fights a lot. They added in enough variety to the normal combat, and sometimes had me use what I've learned throughout the game. The final boss in particular is a great amalgamation of everything we fought up to that point. While I was disappointed in how they were beaten so quickly, that could also come down to the fact I was on balanced difficulty and above level 50 with the Abyssal Armor set. I was kind of cracked at that point. Alright, let's talk about the story a bit. Now, I'm a firm believer that you should play a game to experience the story for yourself, rather than having someone tell you all the spoilers on YouTube. But at the end of the day, this is a spoiler warning here. If you don't want to hear the story, this is where you should click off and enjoy playing the game yourself. With that said, let's talk story. So the story of Darksiders 3 is actually really simple. It's not very complicated and can be easily understood from beginning to end. That's not to say it doesn't have some twists and turns, just that they're a bit more hidden. So the game starts with Fury walking up to the council while they have War imprisoned and on trial. They give Fury her quest to hunt down the 7 deadly sins who have all escaped their prison. And just like with War in the first game, they also gave Fury a watcher. As she leaves, War tries to tell her that he didn't start the apocalypse and that there are forces against the Four Horsemen, but it seems to fall on deaf ears at the time. This is a very quick setup to the start of the game. Quick exposition, introducing us to the world of Darksiders, and following that up immediately with knowing what the overall main quest is about. Hunting down 7 individuals, the 7 deadly sins made manifest. A cut and dry objective. But as the game progresses, it turns out that this objective is anything but. The quest is easy to understand, but where things progress is where the twist comes into play. Rather than easily finding each and every sin, Fury finds out that what War was warning her about just happens to be true. There are forces moving against the Four Horsemen. The best moment this is made apparent is when she tries summoning her steed, Rampage. She sees that they were not only attacked, but they fall right in front of her. And considering we don't actually get to ride Rampage at all in this game, this was their way of taking her steed out of the story. But it's also right after falling in battle against Wrath, one of the 7 sins. She gets whisked away to the Land of Hollows by the Lord of Hollows himself. This character is yet another player in this game that the Council has seemingly started. And yes, I say the Council because the previous games have heavily hinted at it being them that started the apocalypse, which essentially means they betrayed everyone. We just don't know the why of it yet. You see, there are twists and turns here. While the main objective is to capture all 7 deadly sins, there are other things in the background that are moving at the same time. The story pretty much follows the same route. The A plot of capturing the sins is coupled together with the B plot of uncovering the conspiracy of the Council and having Fury develop as a character. The A plot is the simple story, with the B plot being the more complex one. It also takes over half the game before both plots start to muddle into each other a bit. While the A plot is the driving force, it's also what leads to the later revelations in the story of the B plot, which is arguably the more interesting storyline. Through a good portion of the game, Fury is kind of insufferable to deal with. She's narcissistic, prideful, and believes herself to be stronger than any challenge she faces. This journey here is what humbles her and allows her to see what really matters. And honestly, seeing Fury go from who she was at the start of the game into seeing what she becomes by the end of it is one of my favorite parts of the story here. She develops over time, she grows wiser, is less angry at everything, and really starts to understand what she needs to do by the end of the game, fighting against the corruption of the Council themselves. This transformation in her character is worked on throughout the whole story, and I like that a lot. The things that she says start to sound different as she starts to understand the world better. That's called growth. But at one point in the story, you come across a demon that'll tell Fury that the Lord of Hollows is not exactly a good guy, or sus, as the kids say. This is one of those few times I've seen that we get to make a decision in the story. We can either choose to believe this demon, Abraxas, and then go on to take down the Lord of Hollows, or we can choose to attack Abraxas instead. The two options here play a role in the story. You can take down either Abraxas or the Lord of Hollows. But there is a third option available where you take them both down instead. Choosing this option at least lets you fight every boss in the game. However, it appears there is a correct choice. That choice being to take down Abraxas and letting the Lord of Hollows go free. In this decision, the Lord of Hollows still fades away, but he leaves an item for Fury that you wouldn't have otherwise. And with this item, it turns out is very important, as we get an extra cutscene at the end of the game involving it. But this does tell us something here. Not only is there a correct choice to make, but it also shows us just how much Fury has grown as a character. Rather than just taking them both out, or blindly believing a demon under the guise of betrayal, she takes out the demon and lets another go. Well, whatever the Lord of Hollows is. But that aside, I did say that Envy was my favorite designed sin in the game. Turns out, they're also the twist boss. The first sin that we take out in the game is called Envy, but by the time we take out Pride, we find out that the Watcher was actually Envy all along, watching and subtly guiding Fury to the outcome they wanted most: power. And when you finally arrive to fight Envy, they're straight up attacking the Council with the full power of the 7 deadly sins at their command. Now, I both love and dislike this fight. It's a cool end piece to the story, having Envy throwing all of the other sins at us. This is a fight that involves everything that we've learned in all of the previous fights. Not to mention, Envy is using a bunch of weapons that are reminiscent of all 4 of the Horsemen's weapons. I love every aspect of the decisions that went into the fight right here. What I wasn't a fan of is that it just ends so quickly. There's no second phase, nothing that goes above and beyond. When compared to Gluttony, Envy's fight here doesn't hold a candle to that difficulty. Now I understand that I'm technically playing on balanced, above level 50, and wearing the abyssal armor from the DLC, but that still doesn't mean the fight isn't anticlimactic by the ending. If they added a second phase here, I honestly believe the fight would have been much better. It's supposed to be the penultimate battle using everything we've learned in the game, and yet I still feel like fighting Gluttony again would be tougher. But then, after taking out Envy, we do get a cool cutscene scuffle between them and Fury. And then we get a cutscene where the Council attacks Fury, right up until they see her holding the item that the Lord of Hollows left her. The only tidbit of information we have on it is that Fury claims that it can destroy the Council, and she then throws the talisman holding all 7 sins at the Council. It explodes, and she leaves the place. Fury is then tasked with protecting the humans, while the Destroyer himself, the final boss of the first game, shows up to attack them. When at first Fury felt nothing for the humans, she eventually works towards being their guardian before the final battle to come. Considering the Destroyer showed up at the end of the game also shows that Darksiders 3 still ends before Darksiders 1 in the timeline. Darksiders 1 is still the current furthest point in time in the overall story. It's a very interesting way to go about things, and one I hope we get a good and satisfying conclusion to in the near future. And like I said, it's a simple story. It's really easy to follow along. It does show off what quest Fury was on, while the other 3 horsemen were off on their own quests. We even get to see Strife at the end of the game. Turns out he was disguised as a human all along. And since we now have the first 3 horsemen having their own personal games, I'm still hoping that Darksiders 4 is Strife's solo game. Darksiders Genesis is also available, but it looks more like a spin-off that expands the universe. But we'll get to that in time. The next Darksiders game is on its way, and as of the writing of the script, we still don't know if it's Darksiders 4 officially, if it's Strife's solo game, or if they're just moving on to that theoretical 5th game with all the horsemen. But I guess we'll find out at some point. That said, that's Darksiders 3. I did enjoy it, but it did feel like there was something missing from it that the others had. It could have been different developers, devs lost their original sauce, a lower budget, plenty of things. Darksiders 3 is good. I do see why people claim it doesn't compare to the first 2 games, but I really enjoyed it nonetheless. It's good enough to get a playthrough if you enjoy this universe. I'm glad it was made as it helped to show us all that there's still a future for this series. At this point, I want to see the franchise through to its end. Here's hoping we get there someday. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you liked the video, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Adios.